Catherine is obviously very unwell.
I know this. Kate is very unwell. She is physically unwell.
Ever-evolving soap opera, that is, of course, what's happening over at Royal Lodge.
It's reasonable also to suspect that she is even more unwell than we thought, hence why we're in this situation.
A joint statement released by King Charles and Prince William just shattered the carefully maintained silence surrounding Princess Catherine's condition. And what they revealed about her medical crisis contains details so alarming that reporters literally froze when the phrase, "We ask for understanding in this difficult moment," was added by the king himself. But here's what makes this situation genuinely terrifying. Catherine had been experiencing symptoms for months that she desperately tried to hide, including a tremor in her hands. She couldn't control. That started small when holding a teacup, but grew until she was spilling things and struggling to sign documents without her signature wobbling across the page. Why she developed a terrifying habit of disappearing inside her own head during conversations with her children, suddenly realizing she hadn't heard a word they'd said for 5 minutes while they tugged her sleeve, calling "Mommy, Mommy," with increasing concern. How the night everything changed, she collapsed in her private sitting room with the room spinning violently and her vision blurring while she lay on the carpet, unable to move or call for help until staff discovered her. And the moment Prince William burst through the door after being summoned from a meeting to find her surrounded by medical equipment, looking impossibly small and fragile against white linens, while the doctor's hesitation before speaking told him everything he needed to know. Once you understand why the palace physician used terms like critical condition and multiple system failure and uncertain prognosis. While William nodded mechanically, trying to look rational, when inside he was screaming, why King Charles received an urgent summons requesting immediate family meeting, and felt the truth in his bones that she was dying before anyone confirmed it, and what it means that doctors eventually had to discuss end-of-life care and allowing the family time to say goodbye, after telling William they had consulted leading experts in 3 countries who agreed they'd done everything medically possible. You'll realize this medical emergency came closer to tragedy than anyone publicly acknowledged, and the family spent days preparing for an outcome too devastating to fully comprehend. Princess Catherine was the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel like they mattered. She possessed a warmth that could fill an entire room without saying a single word. Her strength wasn't loud or commanding. It was quiet and steady, like an ancient oak tree that bends in storms but never breaks. At least that's what everyone had always believed. But even the strongest trees have roots that can weaken, and Catherine's roots were beginning to fail her in ways she desperately tried to hide from everyone, including her family. The fatigue crept in like fog rolling across a harbor, so gradual she didn't notice until it had completely surrounded her. Where she once woke with energy and purpose, she now had to force herself from bed, her limbs feeling heavy and uncooperative. Getting dressed became an exhausting task. Choosing which shoes to wear somehow required more mental energy than she could summon. She found herself staring at her wardrobe for long minutes, her mind blank and slow, as if someone had poured molasses through her thoughts. Her hands developed a tremor she couldn't control. It started small, a slight shake when holding a teacup that she blamed on too much caffeine. But it grew progressively worse. She began spilling things, dropping her phone, struggling to sign documents without her signature wobbling across the page like a child's first attempt at writing. She started wearing long sleeves even on warm days, keeping her hands clasped together or hidden in her pockets, terrified someone would notice and ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. The worst part was the moments when she simply disappeared inside her own head. She would be sitting with her children, listening to them chatter about their day, and suddenly realize she hadn't heard a word they'd said for the past 5 minutes. Her youngest would tug her sleeve, calling "Mommy, Mommy," with increasing concern, and she would snap back to awareness with a guilty start, apologizing and asking them to repeat themselves. These episodes frightened her more than the physical symptoms because they made her feel like she was losing herself, slipping away bit by bit, while her body remained behind like an empty shell. Catherine became an expert at deception. When her children bounded into her rooms full of excitement and stories, she would summon every ounce of strength she possessed to smile and laugh and engage with them. She would ruffle their hair and pull them close for hugs, breathing in the sweet scent of their shampoo and letting their joy fuel her for a few precious moments. But the instant they skipped away, the smile would slide from her face like melting wax. She would sink into the nearest chair, her whole body trembling with exhaustion, sometimes too weak even to cry. The staff began to notice, though they tried to be discreet. Worried glances were exchanged when Catherine needed help, standing after sitting for too long. Hushed conversations happened behind closed doors about how pale she looked, how thin she was becoming, how her light seemed to be dimming. The footman who brought her breakfast noticed she barely touched her food anymore. Her lady-in-waiting saw the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The housekeeper found her sitting in the dark one afternoon, too exhausted to reach across the room and turn on a lamp. Nobody knew what to say or how to help. Catherine was so determined to appear normal, to keep functioning as if nothing was wrong, that approaching her felt like an intrusion. She would deflect any concern with a wave of her hand and a reassuring comment about being tired or fighting off a cold. She became skilled at changing the subject, at redirecting attention away from herself and onto literally anything else. She protected her suffering like a closely guarded secret, as if admitting something was wrong would make it unbearably real. The night everything changed began like any other. Catherine had managed to get through dinner with her family, participating in conversation with what she hoped was enough enthusiasm to avoid suspicion. She had kissed her children goodnight, holding each one perhaps a moment longer than usual, memorizing the feeling of their small bodies in her arms. After they were tucked safely in bed, she retreated to her private sitting room, finally allowing herself to stop pretending. The room started spinning violently. Her vision blurred and doubled. A wave of nausea hit her so hard she couldn't even call out for help. She tried to stand, thinking she could make it to the bathroom or at least to the bell pull to summon assistance, but her legs wouldn't obey the commands her brain was frantically sending. She took one step and collapsed, her knees hitting the floor hard enough to send shockwaves of pain up her spine. She lay there on the carpet, unable to move, unable to do anything except breathe and pray that someone would find her soon. Minutes stretched into eternity. The room grew cold around her, or maybe that was just her body shutting down. She couldn't tell anymore. Every breath felt like work. Her heart hammered irregularly in her chest, sometimes racing so fast it frightened her, then slowing to a crawl that made her wonder if it would simply stop altogether. By the time a staff member discovered her and raised the alarm, Catherine had lost track of how long she'd been lying there. Suddenly, there were voices and hands lifting her carefully onto the sofa. Someone placed a blanket over her shaking body. The palace doctor was summoned urgently from his home, arriving with his medical bag and a deeply worried expression he tried unsuccessfully to hide. He examined her while the room held its breath. Catherine drifted in and out of awareness, catching fragments of concerned whispers and the sound of medical equipment. She heard someone mention calling her husband, heard the panic creeping into voices that were usually so controlled and proper. The doctor's hands were gentle as he checked her vital signs, his brow furrowing deeper with each measurement he took. Prince William was in a meeting when his private secretary's face appeared in the doorway, pale and tense in a way that made William's stomach drop before a single word was spoken. The secretary whispered that Catherine had collapsed and doctors were with her now. William stood abruptly, mumbling something about a family emergency. Already moving toward the door with his hands shaking so badly, he shoved them into his pockets where no one could see. The drive back felt endless. Every red light, every slow-moving car seemed designed specifically to torture him. He sat rigid in the back seat, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. His mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He tried to bargain with the universe, making frantic promises to do anything, give up anything, be anything, if she would just be okay. When he finally reached their private quarters, he took the stairs 2 at a time, despite protests from staff trying to brief him. He burst through the door and stopped short, his momentum dying the instant he saw her. Catherine lay on their bed, looking impossibly small and fragile against the white linens. Her eyes were closed, her face colorless, except for the dark shadows beneath her lashes. Medical equipment surrounded her, wires and monitors creating a barrier between them that made his chest constrict painfully. The doctor approached carefully, and William saw him weighing his words before speaking. That hesitation told William everything he didn't want to know, and he felt his knees weaken. He moved to Catherine's bedside before the doctor could start explaining, needing to touch her to confirm she was still breathing. He sank into the chair beside the bed and reached for her hand. It felt cold and limp in his, so different from the warm, strong grip he was used to. The doctor began speaking behind him, using medical terminology that William struggled to follow through the roaring in his ears. Words like critical condition and multiple system failure and uncertain prognosis floated past him, each one landing like a punch. He nodded mechanically, trying to look like he understood, like he was processing the information rationally and calmly, the way a future king should. But inside, he was screaming. Catherine's fingers moved slightly in his grip, and he leaned forward instantly, hope surging through him. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. She made a small sound, barely more than a breath, and he had to lean closer to hear. Will, she managed, his name coming out weak and slurred. He told her he was there, his own voice cracking as he held her hand and refused to leave her side. But reality didn't stop demanding his attention. His private secretary returned with news that palace advisors wanted to speak urgently. His father had called multiple times. The children were asking questions. Decisions had to be made about what information to release publicly, how to handle the inevitable media storm, what to tell family members who were frantic with worry. King Charles received the phone call while reviewing documents in his private study. His private secretary's voice carried a weight that made Charles set down his pen immediately. Catherine's condition had worsened. The doctors were requesting an urgent family meeting. William was already at the hospital and asking for his father. Charles felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, painful exhale. He had known something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed in such stark terms made it devastatingly real. The confrontation happened in a small conference room that smelled of antiseptic and defeat. The lead physician sat across from William and Charles, her hands folded on the table, her eyes filled with compassion that meant she was about to deliver news no one wanted to hear. She explained that Catherine's condition had deteriorated beyond initial expectations. The infection had spread to multiple organ systems, and despite aggressive interventions, her body wasn't responding to treatment. When William asked what that meant exactly, the doctor took a breath before explaining that without a miracle in the next 48 hours, they would need to begin discussing end-of-life care and allowing the family time to say goodbye. The room seemed to tilt. Charles heard William make a sound like he'd been physically struck. The other physicians looked down at their hands, clearly wishing they could be anywhere else. Charles insisted there must be something, some treatments they hadn't tried, some specialists they could bring in. The doctor gently interrupted, explaining they'd already consulted with leading experts in 3 countries, and everyone agreed they'd done everything medically possible. Now it was a matter of Catherine's body finding strength to fight, and that strength was running out. The decision was made to release a statement. The palace office felt suffocating despite its grand proportions. William sat at the head of the table with his father beside him, both staring at the document that no one wanted to write but everyone knew had become necessary. They revised it again and again, each version feeling simultaneously too revealing and not honest enough. Finally, reluctantly, William said the words that changed everything. "Send it. Release the statement." Within minutes, the carefully crafted announcement spread across the kingdom faster than wildfire. Buckingham Palace announced with profound concern that Princess Catherine had experienced a serious medical setback requiring urgent and intensive medical care. The family requested privacy and asked for thoughts and prayers. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of messages flooded in. Crowds gathered outside the hospital despite requests for privacy. Entire communities came together in spontaneous shows of support. But none of it changed the only thing that mattered. None of the prayers or flowers or tears could heal Catherine's failing body or guarantee she would survive the night. At the hospital, William maintained his vigil, pacing the same stretch of corridor over endless hours. Around 3 a.m, a nurse rushed past him calling for additional personnel. He watched organized chaos unfold, people moving with practiced efficiency that only came from fighting death regularly. Hours passed this way, crisis after crisis, alarms sounding and then quieting. When dawn finally broke, pale and grey through the windows, the lead physician emerged looking decades older than when the night had begun. He told William there had been an unexpected development, something they didn't anticipate, but this time the unexpected change was miraculous rather than tragic. Catherine's eyes finally opened after days of darkness. When she whispered William's name, his head snapped up instantly, his eyes wide with disbelief and desperate hope. He was crying, his whole body shaking with the release of tension he'd been holding for what felt like forever. She managed the smallest smile, though it cost her more energy than it should have, and asked about the children. The doctors gathered the family that evening for an update that felt miraculous compared to grim conversations of previous days. Catherine's vital signs had stabilized. The infection was responding to treatment. Her organs were showing signs of recovery. The road ahead would be long and difficult, requiring months of rehabilitation and careful monitoring. But for the first time since this nightmare began, they could speak about the future with something other than dread. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.